Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be reading from the Let's Not Meet subreddit, so let's jump into it. I found eyeballs inside my closet drawer. This happened about 8 years ago, when I was living in a shared apartment with 3 other people in a fairly rough part of town. The apartment was old and run down. It had slanted floors, exposed wiring, ancient appliances that probably didn't meet code and was overall pretty creepy. It was also infested with cockroaches, which only added to the creepiness factor. The apartment came with a large walk-in closet for the master bedroom and one smaller closet for the second bedroom. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window to look out. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the scream over and over in my head, trying to figure out what it could have been. But just as I was beginning to relax, I heard a noise from inside my closet. I froze. I was unsure if it was my imagination or if I was actually hearing footsteps inside my closet. I listened intently, straining to hear anything else. Then I heard it again, footsteps. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, probably just some drunk people messing around. But a small part of me was still convinced that it was something much more sinister. I just curled up on the floor and waited for whatever was in the closet to come out and kill me. This time I managed to stammer out something coherent, and he finally believed me. We walked over to the closet together and he helped me open the door. We both froze when we saw what was inside. They said that it was probably some kind of prank, and that whoever did it had done a really good job. We threw out all of my stuff and burned all of the old clothing that was in there. As we were doing this, we found a small hole in the back of the closet. It was just big enough for a person to crawl through, but I knew in my heart that it wasn't a prank. I had seen what was in that closet, and nobody was going to believe me anyway. If you want to hear more stories like these, maybe check out my podcast. You can find the link to that in the description. Anyways, I'll see you next time. Bye. I packed up my things and moved out that same day. I never looked back. And even 8 years later, I still get nightmares about those eyeballs. Minutes turned into hours, and the sun began to rise. Still, I didn't move. I stayed curled up on the floor until my roommate came back. I couldn't see anything, but the scream had been so loud and close that it really scared me. I stood there frozen in fear for a few seconds before finally turning off the lights and getting back into bed. Those things were already inside my closet, and I would never be free of them. They were all different sizes, and some of them even seemed to be moving. I don't want to be too graphic here, but they looked like they'd come straight from a horror movie. My roommate was as white as a sheet and quickly called the police. What was making those sounds? Was it whatever had made the noise outside my window? I knew that I had to do something, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Maybe that eyeball stuff was just a prank, and there was some sick person crawling around in your closet watching you while you sleep. What do you think, Opus? I think I'd prefer the eyeballs to be real. That would be less creepy than a human being in my closet. I lay there paralyzed with fear as the footsteps grew louder and more intense. Neither closet had doors, just those cheap curtains that are supposed to be a substitute. And then I heard a scratching sound, as if something was trying to claw its way out. I screamed at the top of my lungs and threw the covers off of me. I got out of bed and slowly approached the closet, each step I took making me feel like I was walking towards my own demise. I was getting ready to go to bed when I noticed that my black duffel bag had unzipped all the way. They were round and black and seemed to glow in the dark. I stumbled back in shock, and then I started to cry. I don't know how long I stood there crying and screaming for help, but it felt like an eternity. I zipped it back up and went about my business. All I know is that I was sobbing uncontrollably as I tried to explain what I'd seen. He must have thought I was crazy because he didn't believe me. He told me to stop being ridiculous and hung up the phone. A few minutes later, I heard what sounded like screams in the apartment above us. They were loud and high-pitched, and they lasted for several minutes. I remember thinking, what the hell? Because I couldn't imagine what kind of noise that was. Figured it was probably just some drunk college kids being stupid, or maybe an animal of some kind. Either way, it wasn't any of my business. The master closet was filled with a bunch of random junk like boxes, half-disassembled furniture, etc. I was debating whether to get out of bed and check it out when my eyes started getting droopy, and I just kind of drifted off to sleep. The second closet, however, was mostly empty except for a few of my things. It was big enough to hold both of our full-length mirrors, which were also old and creepy, along with some clothes, shoes, and bags. It was late at night and I was home alone, so I was lying in bed trying to read a book. But the noise above me was so loud and incessant that it was really starting to get on my nerves. About an hour later, I was awoken suddenly by a blood-curdling scream from right outside my window. Now, I've always been a light sleeper, but after that scream, there was no way that I was going to be able to fall back asleep. As the minutes ticked by, my anxiety began to fade away, and I started to drift off again. My heart started to race, and I began to panic. Then I heard a knock on the closet door. It was soft at first, but then it came again, louder this time. When I got close enough, I could make out the shapes of two eyes peering out from the darkness. Finally, I managed to calm myself down enough to call my roommate who lived in the next room. I don't remember what I said. At that point, I was too scared to do anything. He looked at me like I was insane and asked me again what was wrong. There were hundreds of eyeballs staring back at us. When the cops arrived, they searched the apartment but couldn't find anything. The next day, my roommate and I decided to clean out the closet once and for all. We immediately called the exterminators to come and spray for bugs and roaches. But deep down, I knew that it was too late. That was the last straw for me. I couldn't take it anymore. Yeah, this one's pretty messed up. But anyways, that is all for me today. Hope you enjoyed that Let's Not Meet story. If you did, please leave a like.